tell you how happy I am to see you here tonight. Every night of this gospel meeting, we've had good crowds, and tonight is not an exception. I'm so glad that you have come. Sometimes people are under the false impression that the difference between Christians who attend gospel meetings and those who don't attend is that those who attend are not as busy as those who don't attend. But that simply isn't true. You're as busy and busier than most people, and the reason you're here tonight is because you made it a priority. You chose to come, and that's why you're here right now. And I want you to know that it means a lot to me, it means a lot to the church, and it may be that at the end of our lives, if we have time to reflect just before we slip away, it may be, will be, I suppose, that there will be things we regret, things that we wish we hadn't said, things we wish we hadn't done, days we wish we could relive. But may I suggest to you that you will never, ever regret the time that you spent in assemblies such as this one, worshiping God. Always make it a priority like you have done tonight. You'll never be sorry that you did that. I want to talk tonight about the family, but before I do, I want to say thank you. I want to thank you for inviting my family to come and be part of this meeting. And what a joy it's been to get to know you. This is our first time to be here, and we feel like we know you well. And I love what you're doing here. It's a great church, a warm church, and a happy church, and you obviously love each other. You're working together, and God bless you for it. I want to thank the Shoals for all they've done for us. I looked over my correspondence. I have a notebook in which I keep correspondence for gospel meetings, and I had a stack of back and forth emails from Robert and me, and I read over them, and it's very interesting to see how this whole thing developed and progressed until we got it to this point, and now, just like the rest of life goes by so quickly, now all of it has come to fruition, and we're at the end. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The answer for our homes is where it's always been. It's a matter of faith. It's a matter of choosing to do things God's way. It's not always easy, and often it's contrary to the course of society. It means going against the grain in some ways sometimes, but what we need for our homes are men who are willing to be godly husbands and fathers and take that role. What we need are mothers who are women who are ready to be real mothers and real wives, the way the Bible describes, and parents who are willing to take the kind of initiative to rear their children the way the good book says, in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And I know that we have those kinds of parents in this church, and I'm so thankful for you. This sermon that I'm about to preach is not a criticism to you, it's an encouragement to you to keep on doing what you're doing and to do well. I know you're doing well, and this church is blessed with such beautiful and fine children, and I admire the good work that you're doing. Let this lesson be an encouragement to you to keep on keeping on. Now, here's how I want to do it. Let's make an acrostic of the word family, and I want to talk about tending the various aspects of the lives of our children. How do we tend the children? The word family is what I want you to put down the side of your paper if you're keeping notes. And let's make the letter F represent tending their faith. You want to rear children to be happy, faithful, productive Christians. You want to rear children and keep them unspotted from the world. We're going to have to tend their faith. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, in verse 5, Paul says, Timothy, when I look at you, I see the unfeigned faith, but I've seen this before. He said, this faith that is in you, I saw it first in your grandmother Lois, and then I saw it in your mother Eunice, and now I see it in you too. Now what does that mean? It means, ladies and gentlemen, that faith is a transferable commodity. How do you like that? That you can take it from one generation to the next and may God help your family as you set out to make an unbroken chain until the trumpet blows of people who love God. You may say, I didn't come from a Christian family. Yeah, but you're starting one now. May God help us to have Christian families and to set this in a motion that will continue on for your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, on down till the trumpet blows. And how do we do it? Listen, it is so important, as you're doing, to bring your children faithfully to Bible class and worship. And I'm going to talk about that some more as we progress into this lesson. But what I want to propose to you is that if you want to convey faith to them, if you want to take the faith that you have and put it in their hearts, it's going to have to be more than just bringing them to Bible class and worship. Cindy and I describe it as implementing spiritual family projects. In the little book, Your Mama Don't Dance, we talk about spiritual family projects in which you can get involved. And let me throw out a few of them to you, and you can develop your own. The important thing is that we're doing what Deuteronomy 6 describes. In that chapter, in verse 6, he says, I want you to be instilling the precepts of God into the hearts of your children 4 times during the day. When you're in the house, when you're out of the house, when you're getting up in the morning, and when you're lying down at night. You got that? I mean, if you do it those 4 times, you can forget the rest of the time, right? Just 4 times. But the description is that we're conscious of this all the time. When we're rearing our children, we're always cognizant of the fact that we're rearing them to be Christians, and we don't pass up opportunities to put Christ in their little hearts. So we implement spiritual family projects. For example, suppose you adopt a family missionary. Pick out a faithful brother who's preaching in China or in Zimbabwe or in Colombia or wherever it happens to be. Find a faithful gospel preacher and make him your family missionary. And by that I mean that your family writes letters to him. You send money to him. Let your children, even if they're not old enough to write yet, let them dictate letters. Let them ask their simple little childish questions. What would you like to ask him? And what kind of food do you eat? What do the children wear to school? Where do they go to school? Whatever their questions are. And let them send some of their allowance. Now, don't give them extra. Let them cut off a little of their allowance if you give them one, and put it in an envelope. Send it to the missionary. And you watch what will happen. Before long, you'll start getting letters back from Brother Jones or Brother Smith, and the letter will say, we baptized 2 more precious souls into Christ. And thank you for your help. And your children will be happy because they will know they were a part of that. He's their missionary. You see? Spiritual family projects. What about this? Suppose you decide right now, those of you who have young children, and a lot of you do, suppose you decide right now that every night we're going to have story time. Every night. Now, let me tell you a couple of secrets about it. One is that you got to do it every night. If you don't, what will happen is you fall out of a habit. You got to do it every night. Some nights it'll be short. Some nights it's going to be in a car because you're driving home late at night. Some nights it's going to be very, very brief, and some nights it's going to be long. And I'm going to tell you something. Your children, after they're grown, will forget a lot of the things you did together as a family, but they will not forget the times that you spent, just your little family. It's almost time for bed, and they get the jammies on. You climb up on the bed together. Hopefully, if your spouse is a Christian, mama and daddy, the kids, and you open God's book, and you have a Bible story, and you pray together, and let those children pray, and let them hear you pray. You've got to teach your children to pray. Teach them how to pray. They won't forget this. Spend time in every night having a Bible time, a family time, a story time. Now, a remarkable thing happens too when you do that. As they grow older, and they know it's predictable that every night this is going to happen, every night, what will happen is that they grow into teenagers, and they start having all of these profound questions, these deep questions about life. And what about this friend of mine? I have this friend that I've been emailing with, and she's anorexic. What about this? Or I heard something sexual today, and what does this mean? And what about this? And is this wrong or is that wrong? And you'll find that when they have to want to ask these profound questions, the big questions, they're most apt to do it during that family time because they know that's coming every evening. And sometimes what will happen is that these family times are going to last way into the evening. Sometimes it'll last a long time, and it'll be the best time you ever spent with your children. Spiritual family projects. Suppose you challenge your children to memorize Scripture. And it's going to get a little scary here. You ready? All right. Suppose you say to your children, I can memorize 100 verses of Scripture in a year if you can. Huh? Is that scary? You could say them in blocks of 10 or 2 blocks of 50, or if you really get, you could do the whole 100. But we've been doing this for a number of years, and some of those tapes and CDs are about this kind of a project. Suppose you say, I will memorize 100 if you will. And then you do it, and you do it together. Huh? Maybe set up a goal, and when we accomplish this, here's something we're going to do together. And the very idea, think about how you're going to feel. You get to the end of the year, and you have recited 100 verses from the Word of God. All right, what I'm talking about is this. We've got to tend their faith. And if we do that, it means instilling in them what we already believe. How do you do it? You say, well, I bring them to worship, bring them to church. That's wonderful, but you've got to do more than that. It involves spiritual family projects. Now, one more thing. May I urge you to at least consider sending your children to Freed Hardeman when they get old enough to go. Now, you may think I'm meddling now and not preaching. Well, then let me have a minute to meddle. What's going to happen is that your children one day are going to marry somebody they've been dating. It just happens that way. They're going to marry someone they've been dating. And when they get to the marrying age, think about putting them in an atmosphere where there are hundreds of eligible Christian boys and girls. You say, well, I went to a state school, I married a Christian, and you can do it. It's a doable thing. That's true. But suppose you want to buy a claw hammer. You might say, I want to buy a good claw hammer, so I think I'll go to the grocery store. You might find, if the grocery store is a large supermarket, you might find an aisle with some hardware on it, and you might find a claw hammer. But mister, if you really want to get a claw hammer, you want to be sure you find one, go to the hardware store, and they'll have lots of claw hammers. And there are no guarantees, I know that, but the fact of the matter is, in life, we just about make it or break it on who we marry. May I urge you to consider sending your kids to Freed Hardeman. All right. The first point is we've got to tend their faith. We've got to tend their faith. You don't accidentally raise faithful Christians. It will be because you made deliberate decisions and implemented things in your family with this goal in mind. All right, here's the A. Now, we're going to spell the word family tonight. The word A is tend their actions. Tend their actions. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, we read this familiar verse. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Now, nurture and admonition, very interesting. To raise them in the admonition means that we teach them the right thing and we admonish them or train them. To nurture them, literally in the Greek, means to curb their passions, to train their mind and their morals. And nurturing includes in that Greek word the disciplining of our children. Now, there's a great lot of discussion about disciplining children today, and especially in reference to corporal punishment. I mean, spanking. A lot of discussion about this. And some people have chosen not to discipline their children, really, not in a serious way. And sometimes it's because they've simply made a conscious decision. They don't think this is a good thing to do, and so they don't discipline their children in a strict way. Other people weren't disciplined when they were children, and they never learned it. And so for them, it just never clicks. Sometimes parents don't do it because they made an attempt at it with their first child, and it was just such a failure that they just kind of gave up on it. Let me make something very clear. Child abuse is from hell. Child abuse is evil and wrong and sinful. But discipline from godly parents, and I'm including spanking, which is administered in proper amounts, at proper times, for the right reason, is from heaven. It's from heaven, and it's good. You know, when our children were little, we had some dear friends with whom we went to school. We married about the same time, and our children came along about the same time. And their philosophy about disciplining their children was this, and it was different from ours. It was that we should save our nose for big things. And by that I mean, their idea was that the little things that occur, you don't want to tell them no all the time about the little things, because if you do that, you're going to use up all the no's, and when you really need to say no because it's a big, big issue, you won't be able to make it stick. So you got to save the no's. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a recipe for disaster. The right way is that we start as soon as they know what the word no means. And we start with the little things. You don't wait for the big things. You start with the little things. As soon as they're able to discern what the word no means, that's when you begin. And so they go to touch a flower vase, and you say, no, don't touch that. No, don't do that. And so what's going to happen, of course, is that he or she's going to go over there and touch it. And then you go and you say, no, I said no, don't touch it, right? What are you doing? What are you doing? You're teaching them what it means to obey. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what the Bible says. That's what the Bible teaches. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The interesting thing about that is that while that command is directed to children, the weight of it is on the shoulders of parents, because the parents are the ones who are going to have to teach children how to obey. Now, spanking should be reserved for times when the will is being tested. And by that I mean this. All children, including you and me when we were children, had times when we pitted our will against that of our mother or our father's, right? So mom says, I want you to do this, but that's not what I want to do. And so she says, go pick up your shoes. And I say, no, right? Now there's a moment, right? Freeze it right there. There's a Kodak moment. Just snap that and stop it for a minute. What's happening here, and it happens with all of our children, and it happened with you. What's happening is a contest of the wills. It's always going to happen with all children, contest of the wills. The question is, how do we handle that moment? And the answer is this. Parent, never lose. Simple as that. When your children test your will against theirs, you must always win. It may be that there will be times when you give an instruction, you say, this is what I want you to do. It's not her will. And she tells you, I don't want to do that. You must always win. And if it takes all afternoon, you spend it. You spend the afternoon to make sure, may I say it again, that you always win. Never let your children sass their mom or daddy. Daddy, listen to me. If you ever hear your children sass their mama, you step in. Now, I know that mama can handle that. That's not the issue. You just make sure that you use your voice and they know you're not going to let that happen. You will stop that. Toot sweet. We're going to stop that now. Right? Why is it? And what are we doing with what I'm teaching? What are we doing with this? I submit to you that what we're doing is, first of all, rearing them up in obedience to God, because this is what the Bible says in Ephesians chapter 6, 1 through 4. But what we're doing also is grooming them for a life of service to God. Do you always like what God has told you to do? Is it always comfortable? Is it always the course you would particularly choose to follow if you had your own choice? The answer is no. Why do you obey him? Because he's an authority and you respect his authority. Now, we can learn it from other places, but I want to tell you this. The best place to learn to respect the authority of God is to learn how to respect your mama and your daddy. We got to tend their actions. You ever go to a restaurant, some other public place, maybe a grocery store, and you see children just running wild, and you think nobody owns those children, right? Where's this child's mama? Where's his daddy? And sometimes mamas get like they're from another planet. What I'm saying here now is that we need to tend their actions. Now, let me give you some suggestions. Here's 4 don'ts in reference to child discipline. 4 don'ts in reference to disciplining our children. Number 1 is, don't ignore your children. They belong to you. They are your responsibility. I tell my children, even now, Caleb's 20 years old and in college, I say, listen to me. I own you. You belong to me. To me. Don't ignore your children. When they're little and you're conversing with someone else, you're having a conversation with an adult, and your child comes up and says, Mom, 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 Mom. And what you do is you don't ignore them. What you do is you say, no, wait a minute, wait. I'm having a conversation. This is rude. Don't interrupt. I want you to stand here, and in a minute, I'll talk to you when I'm finished. You stand right here. And then you continue your conversation. And if he says, Mom, 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 Mama, then you reach down and you dust his britches like this. Now listen to me. What you're doing is rude. I want you to wait until I'm finished, and then I'm going to talk to you. Now, you don't ignore the child. You tend that child, and you train the child as you go. Don't ignore your children. All right. The first don't is don't ignore them. Number two, don't yell at them. I don't mean if an 18-wheeler is coming. That's not what I mean. You can yell at them then. I mean when you're disciplining them, you want them to do what you say, but not because you're loud, but because you're daddy, because you're mama. Don't yell at your children. If we lose control, we call into question our authority. I'm the daddy. I'm the mama. Don't lie to your children. Don't lie to them. Sir, if you say to your boy, I'm going to take off work and come play ball with you at 3 o'clock, you break your neck to get there. You make sure, if you say, I'm going to come to your baseball game this afternoon, then you make sure you're there. You say, oh, but I have a client that called. You tell the client, I'm sorry, but I've made a commitment to my boy. One of my main mentors in my preaching was Bob Duncan, and he's gone now, and oh, how I loved him, how I still love him, and all of his work. When his little girl Jill was sick, they had to carry her to the hospital. And she was a little tyke, maybe 4 years old, and took that child to the emergency room, and the nurse said, Mr. Duncan, you'll have to wait out here while we take her in this room, and we're going to put in the IV. And he said, no, I'm going in. And the nurse said, no, sir, I'm sorry, you're not permitted in there. He said, ma'am, you don't understand. See, I told that little girl that I would not leave her during this whole ordeal. And my credibility is at stake with that girl. I'll be going in with her. Never lie to your children. If you say to your child, if you do this again, I'm going to spank you, buddy, you better be sure that you deliver that spanking. I was in my office one day with a good friend of mine, and we were conversing, and his little girl was over there looking at my books, playing with my books, and it was okay with me. I didn't care if she looked at the books. She wasn't tearing them or anything, so it didn't bother me, but it bothered him. And so he turned to her and he said, honey, put down the books. I don't want you to touch the books. Don't touch the books. Leave them alone. And so we continued our conversation, and she just went right ahead, and she just kept right on like he was just not even there. And so directly he turns and he looks to her, and he realizes that she is disobeying him, and he said, honey, I told you not to touch the books. And if you keep on touching those books, I'm going to come spank you. And so we continued our conversation, and she continued just like she was doing. And about that time, this is getting very interesting to me. It's hard for me to listen to him because I want to see what's going to happen here. And directly he turns and looks to her, and he sees that she is disobeying him. And so do you know what he did? Well, he said, excuse me. And he walks over there where she is, and he picks her up in his arms, and he walks back over, and we continue our conversation, and that's it, buddy. That's it. I'll ask you a question. Who won? No, wait a minute. I know what you're thinking. I mean, because we know Dad didn't win, but I want to say to you that the girl didn't win either. She lost. She lost a wonderful opportunity to learn something about authority. About authority. The authority of her father. And I'll tell you something else too. Her daddy lied to that girl. It's no wonder she didn't obey him. Why? Well, he didn't mean it, and she knew he didn't mean it. Right? So the next time he says to her, don't do this, or I want you to do this, and it's contrary to her will, she going to do what he says? She's not. When my children were smaller, I took them to McDonald's. I never was too fond of the food there, but their marketing strategy was brilliant. I mean, the monkey bars out, are you kidding me? My children were crazy about those, I don't know what the monkey bars. And so on this particular day, beautiful day, we were living in Salem, Virginia, and my children were out there playing on monkey bars, and I was standing out there with all the other mothers, and we were watching our children, and so this little girl was up there in the monkey bars playing. And she was, I don't know, 6 years old or so, and her mama comes up to the monkey bars and she said, "Sarah, it's time to go now, come on down." And Sarah looked over at her mama, and then she continued playing. And so mama became a little frustrated and said, "Sarah, come down now." And so Sarah looked over the side and she stuck her tongue out at her mama. And her mama said, "Sarah, if you don't come down right now," and I thought, yonder it comes. "If you don't come down right now, no more swimming for the rest of the day." Oh yeah, I thought, call the authorities. This lady's out of control. This is too much, right? And so Sarah just ignored her. "If you don't come down right now, no more candy for the rest of the day." Well, you know what? It's more fun to play than to eat candy, so Sarah just ignored her mother. And I don't know if you've ever thought about what a 30-year-old woman looks like climbing up one of those rope ladders, but man, she started up the ladder, and she dragged this screaming, kicking girl down the ladder, and you know what didn't happen? Sarah didn't get a spanking. It was all I could do not to give it to her myself. Now I want to ask you a question. Who won? Wait a minute. We know that Mama didn't win, but listen to me. Sarah lost too. And it's not about the playground. It's not about the monkey bars, and it's not about my books in my library. It's about a principle of character and teaching them the difference between right and wrong and a respect for what authority is. And what I'm saying to you is in attending of their actions, don't ignore them, don't yell at them, don't lie to them. If you promise a spanking, be sure that you deliver it. If you promise you're going to be with them, be sure that you go and you'll be with them. Don't lie to them. Let me give you one more. Now, I'm a little bit sheepish about this one, and I'm going to give you a disclaimer before I say it. If anybody's doing this, I don't know it, okay? So if you think, "Oh, no, I can't believe he said that he's heard me do that," I haven't. I don't know of anybody here that does this, but it's pretty popular. Number 4, don't count to your children. Okay, are we together? You know what I'm saying? You know this works? So you say, "Here's what I want you to do." And so they just don't do it. And so what do you say? You say, 1, 2, and then you break into fractions, right? 2.5. And what are we saying with that? Why do we do that? I'd love to know which was the first mom that ever did it. Why do we do it? And what we're saying is this. You don't have to obey me the first time I say it. You just have to obey me after we get down into arithmetic, right? After we start counting, then you obey me. So what if we change that and we say, "Honey, let me tell you how much I love you," and we're going to quit counting. And what that means is, when I say pick up your toys, you know what I mean? I mean, go ahead and do it now. I want you to do it now. Now, when I talk about spanking, ladies and gentlemen, I think it ought to be reserved for conscious disobedience. You don't spank a child the first time you teach him something. You teach him what he's supposed to do, and then when he chooses to violate that, that's when the spanking comes in. When his will is different from yours, and he's saying, "I'm going to do it my way, not your way," that's when the spanking comes in. All right. I got to get going because we're going to run out of time. The F is tend their faith. A, tend their actions. M, ladies and gentlemen, we've got to tend their morals. In America, this has never, ever been as true as it is now. The amount of parental involvement in reference to morals has never been more critical than it is right now. And we talked about this some last night, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it, but a little bit. What's happened is that a lot of Christian parents have become very smug about their television viewing. And somehow we got this idea that if Hollywood turns it out, but we got to see it. I mean, if it's what's on right now, then we need to be entertained by it. May I observe with you that the Bible nowhere says that I'm obligated to be entertained? I'm not saying entertainment's wrong. Entertainment's not wrong in and of itself. But I'm not commanded to be entertained. We elevate it to a degree that I just feel like if Hollywood turns it out, buddy, we got to see it. But the answer is, that's wrong. Just because Hollywood turns it out doesn't mean Christians have any business going to see it. May I suggest to you that you have rules in your house about television watching? And I don't just mean about quantity. I mean about quality. I mean that you set up different, specific, crystal clear guidelines. If they start doing this sexually, we change the channel or we turn it off. If they start doing this in reference to their language, then we change the channel or we turn it off. Now, I know what's going to happen. You're not going to watch very much television because so much of it is garbage. I know that. But there's another problem, too, and that is that if you haven't had these kinds of rules all along, and probably you already have, but if you haven't, you become anesthetized. You don't hear it. I mean, you get so used to it, and is that scary or what? That we Christians would be able to hear that stuff and view that stuff, and it no longer offends us, even though it offends God. In 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 6, the Bible says, love does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in the truth. Have we come to the place where we rejoice in iniquity? Look, your children are going to grow up one day, and they're going to have to make moral decisions without you being there. How are they going to have the backbone, the intestinal fortitude to make the right decisions? Where is it going to come from? May I submit that it can come from you, but only if you draw specific lines where you say, we are offended by immorality. In this home, we are always going to be offended by immorality, and in reference to our entertainment choices, we demonstrate that attitude. So, what's in your video case back home? What kind of movies do you own? And what are they rated? What's in those movies? What kind of movies do you go to see? What kind of things do you commonly watch on your television? And do your children, do your children know right now that at your house you have specific rules in place and we just don't violate those rules? Do they know that? Or is it time to implement some of those rules? Is it time to go to your cabinet where your videos are, your DVDs are, and look at each one and say, is this offensive to God? And if it is this offensive to God? And if it is, maybe we just need to clean house. And if you haven't done it, maybe you should do it tonight, as soon as you get home. Because what we're about is trying to raise these kids to make moral decisions when we no longer are living in the same house with them. We've got to tend their morals. And entertainment can be public enemy number one. Let's move on. Now the eye. We must tend their icons. Let's let eye be their icons. A lot of parents feel like this is one thing over which they have no control. And it's true that there are some things in the rearing of your children over which you have little or no control, but not this one. Not this one. A 16-year-old boy recently went with his family, Christians, into the home to visit another family of Christians. They also had a 16-year-old boy. And the visiting boy went into the room of the other, and there was a poster of Britney Spears on the wall in the bedroom. And the visiting boy said, why do you have her up? And the boy in whose room they were responded, well, I don't look at her very much. You got any control over that? I mean, do we have any control over our children's icons? What we ought to do, daddies, is to get us a sign that says, Joshua 24 and 15, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and put it up and make sure that we don't have things in that house that offend God. Sometimes Christian young people like to dress like the most worldly entertainers in America, right? And you say, well, is body piercing wrong? Is it wrong to wear these things? You know what? Some things, of course, immodest dress is always wrong in public. But even besides that, to take on the image of teenage icons. Some of these things may not be wrong in and of themselves, but they can put our young people in a category of the most worldly people that hell has been able to create in America today. I don't have control over everything in my children's lives. I know I don't. But you know what? I've got control over what's hanging on the walls in my house. That television, I bought that television. I know how to unplug it. If we can't control it, we can get rid of it. I bought that computer. If we can't control it, we can get rid of it. Right? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. May I challenge you that for all of your children's lives, so long as you're alive, that they know that your house is a place where Jesus lives. Did you hear what I said? That your children know now, by clear, distinct means. They know now, and as long as they live, when they think about your house, they know that's where Jesus lives. In Luke chapter 15, you remember the prodigal son? And the Bible says that he wanted to live in riotous living. Later we learn from the older brother that he wanted to live his life with harlots. He wanted to party, right? What did he do first? He left his father's house. Why? Go up and ask him, and he would answer you this: I can't live like this and stay at home. My daddy would never let me live like this. That's right. And when he learns better, he's feeding the swine. The Bible says that when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? Watch. I will arise and go to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. What? He'd say, I know one thing. My father's house is always the same. It's always the same. I can count on this. The world around me may crumble, and there's so many things in which I cannot place confidence, but I can place confidence in this. In my Father's house is where Jesus lives. May I challenge you to have that kind of home for your children. We've got to tend their icons. Now, the L. Let's tend their loyalties. Their loyalties. We need to tend their loyalties to family. So, right now, if you have children at home, you're rearing your grandchildren's parents. I mean, think about that. How's it going to be? And sometimes fathers lose their grip on loyalty to the family. They don't mean to, but sometimes they lose their grip on what a job is really for. I mean, our job is not an end in itself. It's the means toward an end. I mean, the end is that I want to provide for my family. That's what my job is about. It's taking care of my family and seeing to my children. That's what my job is. But sometimes I get the cart before the horse, and the job becomes an end in itself, and the family is really secondary because I like my job. I want to do a good job. I want to advance in my job. And sometimes it goes too far, and I compromise the loyalty that I need to be showing my children to the family. Sometimes mamas who don't have to work outside the home choose to do so in order to live in a better house, in order to drive finer cars, in order to have material things. But the price tag for that kind of a choice is that our children learn a disloyalty to that family. It may be very subtle, but a disloyalty to that family. We need to teach our children loyalty to the family. We need to teach them loyalty to the Lord. Now, one of the ways that we do that in a very tangible way is by bringing them faithfully to Bible class and worship. I know that Christianity is more than just coming to worship assemblies. I know that. But worship assemblies and Bible classes and assemblies such as this one are very tangible ways that we can train our children to know that we put the Lord first. So right now, do your children believe that coming to Bible class and worship is a priority over, say, schoolwork? I mean, you're here tonight, but do they believe it's a priority over relaxation, over recreation, over sports? Do your children believe that this is a priority? And you say, well, yeah, I mean, We believe that worship ought to be over sports, and we put it ahead of sports, and we come to worship instead of sports, unless, of course, it's a really big game. I mean, if it's a big game, then we might miss worship to go play the game. And you know, we put worship over schoolwork most of the time. Well, unless of course there's a really big test the next day. Or we put worship ahead of relaxation, unless of course we're really tired, and then we make an exception. Think about what we're training our children. You may be training your children for total apostasy, and you don't even know it. See, because what happens is they end up growing up. And from where are they going to get the tenacity, the backbone? Where are they going to get the backbone to make the decisions to do things God's way? And it won't always be about a little league ball game. It won't always be about a history test the next day. It's going to be big things, big decisions. And will I put the Lord first, or will I put my own interests first? And where are they going to get the intestinal fortitude to make the right decision? And I say to you, one of the ways is by prioritizing. So I went to Freed-Hardeman. I grew up and I went to Freed-Hardeman. Do you know how often we had a really big ball game? Listen to me. If Freed-Hardeman's playing, they're all big. You hear me? You know how often we had a really big test? Every week we had a big test. You know how often we were tired? We were really tired and needing relaxation? Are you kidding? I've been out for 20 years and I'm still tired. What I'm saying is they grow up. And these kinds of things, if we let them inhibit us from faithful service now, are going to inhibit them from faithful service then. I need to train their loyalties to the family, to the Lord, and let's do one more and then I'll quit. I need to tend all of these things while they're young. Let's let the why be while they're young. I need to tend to them while they're young. A lot of the things I've talked about tonight, I'm aware, are not going to have near the impact if your child is already half grown. We need to start young. We need to start young when they're pliable. Don't lose these young years. Our children are only with us for a short amount of time. They're really just visitors that come to our home for a short amount of time, and then they go their way. You don't have very long to do this. You'd better be working on it right now. Not long ago, I got a call that preachers get from time to time. It's happened a few times since I've been preaching. You never like to hear the call, but it comes. Brother Colley, will you come and conduct this funeral service? Now, you don't know these people, but they're looking for a preacher from the Church of Christ. Teenager, 18 years old, 2 o'clock in the morning, alcohol, drugs, party, drag racing in the country. In the front of that car, made contact with that oak tree at a very rapid pace. And those sorry friends of his held him in their arms while he expired. That's it. And so I stood in that funeral home, and that parlor was just, chapel was filled with teenagers, and teenagers are very demonstrative of their emotions, and you can imagine how they were lined around the perimeter. They'd filled the lobby out there. It was just absolutely packed, and as gently as I could, I urged them that life is important and that there's a life after this one. And I begged them to stay away from alcohol and drugs. Stay away from it. It'll hurt you. Serve God. After the funeral, we drove out to the country, to the cemetery, and we all assembled. I've never been in a circumstance like this before. They were playing loud music from their car radios, and I thought to myself, we are not going to have this graveside service with that playing. But anyway, when it came time, they turned it off. We were gathering all around, just about to start, and this Mustang, this hopped up Mustang, roared past the cemetery. And I thought, oh, how inappropriate. And if that, I don't know who that guy is, but if he knew what we were doing here, he would have better sense than to interrupt like that. And one of the teenagers turned to me and said, named him and said, he's one of the pallbearers. This is his tribute to the dead. That was the atmosphere in which this occurred. I conducted the graveside service, and people began to disperse. And two different mothers came to me. Neither knew about the other, but they both came saying essentially the same thing, and it was this. Brother Colley, do you see that boy over there? And the other one said, that girl over there. Yes, ma'am. He's my son. And the truth is, he's doing the same things that he did. And I'm scared to death. What can I do? And I said, are you a Christian? Yes, well, I'm a member of the church, but I hadn't been in a long time, many years. I mean, my job, and we got so busy, and I won't make excuses. I hadn't been to the church building in many, many years. And to both these ladies I said this, it is very, very late. You know that. It is very, very late. As I see it, you have one chance, and only one chance to save your teenager. And here's how you do it. Tonight, you take that teenager in your room, and incidentally, those kids had a party planned for that night. I said, you take him or you take her in your room, you look him right in the eye, and you say this, I'm so sorry that I've let you down. I hope you'll forgive me. I haven't raised you in the Lord, and I knew better. But I've let you down. Now I want you to know that Sunday morning, not only am I going to be in worship, I'm going to be restored. I'm going to go before God and before those Christians and say, I want to be faithful again. Both of these women, incidentally, were members of the Church of Christ. I'm going to be restored and be faithful. And then I said, then you say to that teenager this, please come with me. Please come with me, and let's serve God together. Ladies and gentlemen, the things I've talked about tonight are important principles. I'm aware of the fact as a father that children are different. If you have two children, you have two different individuals. And I know that we work differently with different children. What I've tried to lay out tonight are principles which I believe are applicable, though, to most all children. And I hope that it will be helpful. I hope it'll do good and no harm. Family. And may God help us as we tend our children. It may be here tonight is someone who has to obey the gospel. You need to obey the gospel so you can go to heaven, because there's no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. It's going to be Jesus or not at all. My sins are either going to be pardoned at Calvary or punished in hell, but they're not going to be overlooked. And Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me. Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? You need to obey the gospel so you can go to heaven when you die. But you need to obey the gospel so you can be a good influence on the people who are the dearest on earth to you. Become a Christian if you haven't. You can do that tonight, this very night. If you are a member of the body of Christ but you haven't been faithful and you need to be restored tonight, do it for yourself. Do it for yourself, but do it also for your family, for those who are influenced by you, those who mean the most on this earth to you. We're going to sing a song of encouragement. If you'd like to respond, come now as we stand and sing.